let's just dive right into this explainer. We hear it all the time, right? America is the richest and most powerful country in history. But here's the thing we're really unpacking today. That rise to number one, it was actually completely unexpected, like a total accident. If you go back to the very beginning, most of North America was literally just ignored for more than 100 years after it was discovered. It's kind of crazy when you think about the sheer scale of this historical misunderstanding. There were maps made right before Christopher Columbus set sail, and they are completely missing a whole lot of landmass. Sure, the Vikings had mentioned they found some island out west, but absolutely no one realized it was a massive continent. So when Columbus set sail, he definitely wasn't looking to discover America. He honestly believed he could find a lucrative trade route to Asia just by sailing west. Instead, he stumbled upon some islands in the Caribbean Sea. He didn't find the spices he was expecting, but he still thought, hey, I must be close to India. That's why he called the native people Indians, grabbed some goodies, and took them back to the King and Queen of Spain. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates just how ignored North America was. Columbus arrives in 1492, right? Then, fast forward to 1539, the Spanish send an expedition up into North America. But because they didn't find obvious glittering riches like gold and silver, they essentially just shrugged and ignored all these supposedly useless lands up north. It literally took almost a full century for another major player to even attempt to settle the continent, with England finally establishing its first colony in 1585. So, how exactly did we get from a completely ignored landmass to a global superpower? Well, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to trace this chaotic 423-year roller coaster through 6 key phases: the accidental discovery, colonies and conflicts, a messy independence, the Louisiana windfall, expanding sea to sea, and finally becoming a global power. Section 1, the accidental discovery. Searching for spaces, finding gold. So right after Columbus's voyage, the world was essentially carved up. A few years prior, the Portuguese figured out they could reach Asia by sailing around Africa. To avoid a massive conflict, Spain and Portugal quite literally drew a line right down the middle of the map. They agreed that all non-Christian lands on one side belonged to Portugal, and everything on the other belonged to Spain. So Portugal built this massive trading empire in Asia, while Spain got busy conquering their half of the world, focusing heavily on the southern parts of the Americas where all the gold, silver, and people actually were. I absolutely love this quote because it just perfectly captures the whole motivation of the era. Columbus comes back from his first voyage, and the interaction with the Spanish monarchy probably went a little something like this. Columbus says, "Hey, your majesties, I just got back from Asia." The king asks, "Great, where are the spices?" Columbus admits, "Well, we haven't found the spices yet, but they've got lots and lots of gold." And the king immediately replies, "Now you're talking, Columbus, go back. Tell them all to be Christians and bring back that gold." That sheer obsession with gold is exactly why they conquered the South and totally ignored the North. Moving on to Section 2, colonies and conflicts. A slow start. While Spain was busy down south, the English actually sent an explorer to North America pretty early on, but then they waited almost 100 years before seriously trying to colonize it. Their first attempt at Roanoke, North Carolina in 1585, a massive failure. The colony mysteriously disappeared while England was distracted fighting a war with Spain. They tried again at Jamestown, which finally worked out. Then came the strict Christmas-banning Christian pilgrims at Plymouth. It was definitely a messy, delayed entry, but soon enough, the East Coast was covered with British colonies. Meanwhile, the French were busy claiming the whole middle of the continent. By 1754, it was time for a war to figure out who really owned America. And the demographics here are just stark. New France had a population of about 60,000 people, while the British colonies had more than 1 million. Over 1 million. Both sides teamed up with local Indian tribes, which is why it's called the French and Indian War. But with a population difference that staggering, it was glaringly obvious who was going to win. The British totally crushed the French. Section 3. A messy independence, from taxes to revolution. Now, winning a massive war comes with consequences. It left Britain with a ton of new land in America, including parts of Louisiana and Canada, but it also left them with massive, massive debt. They had spent an absolute fortune, and their big solution to this financial crisis? Tax the very colonists they had just helped defend. So the fundamental disagreement basically looked like this. Britain comes in and says, "Hey, colonies, you know that incredibly expensive war we helped you win? Yeah, we're going to start collecting lots of taxes to pay for it." And the colonies fire back, "What? You never help us. We're always helping you. And how can you tax us if we don't even get to vote?" This funny but incredibly pivotal disagreement over taxation without representation, escalated super fast. A disagreement turned into a fight, and a fight turned right into the 1776 Declaration of Independence. But here's the catch. Declaring independence and actually functioning as a real country are two very different things. It took the Americans 5 more years to actually win the war, and once they did, it was a total disaster. The government they created was a complete mess. The 13 colonies were basically acting like 13 independent countries that were only united in name. The new nation was failing, and it was failing fast. It wasn't until they wrote a brand new constitution and elected George Washington as the first president in 1789 that they actually had a federal government that worked.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Louisiana Windfall, Napoleon's Pivot. At this point, the USA was actually still pretty small. All the land to the west belonged to Spain. But shifting our focus to Europe for a second, a guy named Napoleon had seized power in France. He made a sneaky deal with Spain to get Louisiana back for France because he wanted to build this massive North American empire. However, the Americans desperately needed the Mississippi River for trade, so they sent representatives to France, really just to see if they could buy the city of New Orleans.
But Napoleon was facing a massive problem, an impending war with Britain. He quickly realized that defending an empire all the way across the ocean while fighting Britain was going to be nearly impossible. So he does this sudden, almost absurd pivot. He declares, if we sell Louisiana to the Americans, they will be our friends forever, and Britain will be ours. He just decides to abandon his entire American empire dream and sell the whole massive territory, purely to fund his European wars. And the price tag for this incredible windfall, just $15 million. I mean, this is arguably one of the greatest real estate bargains in human history. With the stroke of a pen and a relatively tiny amount of money, the United States instantly doubled in size. And man, did they need that land. The U.S. population was absolutely exploding, almost doubling every 20 years. The main driving force? Get this, the average American family in those days had 7 children. 7! All those kids needed someplace to live, which sparked a massive, chaotic push westward into all this newly acquired, supposedly unclaimed land, which of course came at a massive detriment to the Native American tribes who already lived and hunted there. Section 5. Expanding sea to sea. Opportunistic deals. America was now pushing outwards in literally every direction. In 1819, they acquired Florida from Spain. Soon after that, American settlers who had been invited into the sparsely populated northern territories of Mexico quickly outnumbered the locals. These settlers broke free, created the independent Republic of Texas, and eventually asked to join the U.S. Now, this brought up a huge, simmering issue: slavery. Texas was a slave-owning republic, and bringing them in was incredibly controversial, though President Polk eventually annexed them anyway. Integrating Texas led directly to a border dispute and a very messy war with Mexico. And check out this number again, $15 million. We're seeing a recurring theme of checkbook diplomacy here. After winning the war, the U.S. paid Mexico that exact same sum for its vast northern territories, including what is now California. They also struck a deal with Britain to split the Oregon Territory. So through this wild mix of great luck, money, and war, America now stretched completely from sea to sea. But you know what? They didn't stop there. The expansion strategy got highly opportunistic and, frankly, kind of bizarre. Case in point, the Guano Islands Act. The U.S. government basically told its citizens that if they found an unclaimed island in the middle of the ocean and it was covered in valuable bird droppings, which were used for fertilizer and explosives back then, they could just claim it for the United States. Is it covered in bird droppings? Congratulations, son, you're standing on U.S. soil. It's a hilarious anecdote, but it perfectly illustrates America's relentless appetite for new territory and resources. But despite all this outward success, gold rushes, and free farmland, there was a deeply rooted crisis tearing the country apart from the inside. The deeply divisive issue of slavery finally reached a breaking point. The North viewed slavery as a great evil, while the South's entire economy practically relied on it. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, Southern slave states, fearing abolition, seceded. This erupted into a devastating civil war that resulted in massive casualties and nearly destroyed the entire nation. Ultimately, though, the North won, the slaves were freed, and the Union was preserved. Almost immediately after the Civil War, America pivoted right back to expansion. And here is another unbelievable real estate deal. Secretary of State William Seward was actually recovering from an assassination attempt when he engaged in a hasty late-night negotiation with a Russian diplomat named Stokel. The Tsar of Russia really wanted to offload Alaska,
So after a bit of haggling, they settled on a mere $7 million for the absolute entirety of the Alaskan territory.
Which brings us to the turn of the century. Section 6, becoming a global power, islands and empires. America's borders were essentially set, but the country was facing a massive identity crisis. American businessmen had basically taken control of the Hawaiian Islands and asked the U.S. to annex them. The president initially said no, arguing America shouldn't misuse its power like that. But others argued, hey, if America didn't step in, a rival power like Germany or Japan would just take Hawaii and use it against us. It sparked a fierce debate over whether America should even get involved in foreign affairs.
Well, that debate was settled by a seriously dizzying sequence of events starting in Cuba. Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain. After an American warship mysteriously exploded in a Cuban harbor in 1898, the U.S. demanded Spain leave. Spain declared war, and in the resulting Spanish-American War, the U.S. rapidly captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, ironically putting an end to the very empire Columbus had started. During all this chaos, the U.S. just went ahead and annexed Hawaii anyway. A few years later, an incredibly energetic Theodore Roosevelt struck a sneaky deal, backing a revolution in Panama to secure the rights to build the Panama Canal, completely transforming global naval travel by 1914. And that brings us right to the dawn of World War I. In just over 400 years, a totally ignored landmass had morphed through sheer accidents, checkbook diplomacy, and wars into a global superpower. And as we look at the world today, this historical roller coaster leaves us with a really provocative question that the country literally still wrestles with. Should America mind its own business, or should it mind its own interests? It's a fascinating thought to leave you with. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.